Recently, YouTuber JJ McCullough released a video titled, How Canadians Should and Should Not Think About America. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and say it right off the bat, I do not think about the US in any of the ways that JJ has approved. I'm gonna be breaking the rules, and I should be punished. However, as much as I find his position, let us say, insubstantive, there's very little to criticize in his actual video. It's mostly just him saying Canadians should engage more in their own politics, and also not turn up their noses like snooty little buttholes at American politics. I share that sentiment, even if I am part of the problem. Maybe I titled this something like, JJ McCullough doesn't understand Canada, or something like that. I'm just playing the game, baby. I'm getting the clicks. People like that confrontational shit. It's doing numbers, I hope. JJ, if you're watching this, I'm not trying to be a dick. It just happens to me, I don't know why. This video is going to be less of a response to JJ's and more of using it as a kind of thought starter, a thought slimer, if you will. And it's worth noting also that this one is just going to be me mostly off the cuff. I'm a little worked up and I'm in the middle of working on a much larger video right now about techno-optimism that is, in typical Thought Slime fashion, ballooning out of control. Just wanted to get this one out quick. Had to say these words to you, the computer people who pay me, while I was still mad about them. Hopefully you enjoy the format, and if you do, maybe I'll make more of these little quick slimes for you. So now let's get to the essay part of the video. Juggajuice positions Canadian anti-American sentiment as mostly a factor of Canadians needing to distinguish ourselves. In order to feel as though we have a national identity, we have to draw arbitrary distinctions between the larger, more dominant, bigger-dicked nation we are closest and most similar to. Much of his analysis takes for granted that Canadian culture, by virtue of us being the beta cuck country, will always be dwarfed by American cultural output, listing such examples of American cultural output as Marvel movies and Taco Bell.
It has to be acknowledged that many of the great production centers of these sorts of cultural products are located on this side of the imaginary line. And by cultural production centers, I mean institutions like Hollywood and elite universities and large corporations. This really shouldn't be seen as a competitive failure on anybody's part. It is just a statement of undeniable cultural reality.
And while I'm sure there is indeed a patriotic or nationalist desire to establish a sort of brand for Canada so that we can feel like special Canadian boys, blockbuster movies and fast food chains aren't just like neutral cultural influences. They are businesses, they make money, and then that money is kept by the business owners to do sex crimes with. If the culture of one constituent nation within a shared civilization, as JJ imagines, dominates the other, that represents a very real extraction of wealth and power. And he's right, of course. It is the reality of the situation, but like, it kinda sucks. Don't you think? Like, don't you think that it sucks that Canada's film industry is so puny and America's is so mighty and has so many more Spider-Men in it? It kind of sucks that not just Canada, but like most of the world's entertainment industries struggle to compete in relevance to the output of one nation. Simply because that fact is true doesn't mean it's illogical to be resentful of it. It doesn't need to be the case that America gets to be the main movie guy. You know how I know that? Because a lot of American movies and TV shows get filmed in Canada. Then America gets most of the profit from it. We're definitely getting paid a little bit too, but like they get the most of it because it belongs to them. And I think it's actually pretty fair to be resentful of that fact. The fact that our entire entertainment industry exists as a means for other people in richer countries to make more money than we do. And that's just one industry among thousands which follow the same pattern. And we are Canada. There are not a lot of countries richer than us. Imagine how poorer countries must feel in the same situation with less bargaining power or leverage to curb abuse. Because the financial well-being of every nation on Earth is determined by the capricious whims of the United States. They are the biggest consumer of like all consumer goods on the planet, the biggest market, the biggest economy. Their trade can single-handedly determine whether your country thrives or starves. And they regularly exercise that power to punish any nation who dares do anything outside of the United States' interest. And putting aside even that completely unprecedented level of soft power, the United States also possesses the largest, most dangerous, and most belligerent military force in human history. Like, I feel like we don't talk about this enough, but the United States is the only country to ever detonate a nuclear weapon on another at time of recording, and they have the world's largest nuclear arsenal right now, and also believe themselves to possess the unilateral right to determine what other countries may or may not also possess nuclear arms? Also, they routinely bomb, invade, and destabilize other countries with zero pushback internationally. They ignore international law with impunity, despite also having a disproportionate hand in shaping international law for everyone else. They assassinate world leaders not willing to cooperate with them, prop up dictators, fund coups and genocides domestically and abroad, and just generally consider themselves the leaders of the free world. A contradiction of terms, because, like, if the free world is led, then in what sense could you say that it is free? And by happenstance of our geography, Canada's economy and safety is uniquely tied to that of the United States. We are, in essence, a vassal state of the United States, one which is allowed to exist independently only because it would be suicidal for us to do anything counter to the interests of the empire. They possess enormous, unthinkable leverage over us. Indeed, they do the same for most every country on Earth. I don't think it's unreasonable to find that, pretty annoying. It just kind of chaps my ass, like that we're forever under the thumb of the global hegemon. That cheeses me off. All of that being said, there is one key respect that I think Canadians do unfairly begrudge America. Among us lousy Canucks, there is a completely unearned sense of moral superiority towards the States. JJ actually touches on this a little bit, pointing out how a certain variety of middle-class Canadian looks at American politics as a sideshow, completely unconcerned with the actual people whose lives are actually affected, like it's all just a joke to them, But I think it extends a lot deeper than that. I think Canadians tend to view ourselves as better than Americans for a variety of very stupid reasons. If you'll allow me to get a bit fanciful here, to be a fancy lad in my fancy little shorts, the American national myth is probably the cowboy, right? Not real cowboys, the romanticized ideal of cowboys that exists in the American psyche. John Wayne, a rugged individualist who relies on himself, his wits, and his skills rather than any government or social institution for his survival. A renegade who lives completely on his own terms, facing whatever dangers the lawless West throws his way with stoic conviction. If the cowboy has a flaw in this mythology, it's a kind of belligerent pigheadedness, a desire not to be controlled that is so strong it occasionally leads him to violence and other poor decision-making. And that reflects, I think, how Americans like to see themselves, their core values of freedom, self-reliance, and getting to shoot people. I would say that the closest equivalent to a cowboy for Canadians is the hoser, a denim-clad dork wearing a toque and eating poutine, just a harmless, polite, kind of dopey, and deeply uncool guy. As Americans see themselves in the cowboy, Canadians see themselves in this mostly comedic caricature. We pride ourselves on our manners, our soft-spokenness, an agreeability that borders on naivete. Americans see themselves as cool and tough and self-reliant. Canadians see themselves as friendly, likable, and harmless. And the deep irony of all of this, of course, is that all of that national identity is rooted in American stereotypes. Canada's national identity just so paper-thin that we heard Americans making fun of us and we said, yeah, I guess we're like that. I don't know. I don't know what we're like, but they keep saying we're like that, so I guess that's how we are. This is why, for example, JJ is always careful to say aboot instead of about.
About Canada. Talking about American critique about themselves. Too much about stuff about the US who do not talk about Canada. Talking about US politics.
That is, according to Americans, the Canadian accent. Now, in reality, there is no Canadian accent, just like there's no American accent. Canada is the second largest country on the planet in terms of contiguous landmass. There are many Canadian accents. I mean, we have 2 national languages, for fuck's sake. That alone is going to carve things up, I'm from Newfoundland, the most eastern province in Canada, known for its extremely thick and inscrutable accent, which itself, of course, is a spectrum of various regional accents. You think people from Newfoundland are going around saying, oh, what are you thinking about, you poutine Montreal hoser, eh? If you asked me to speak in a Newfoundland accent, I'd say, go fuck yourself. Fuck off. But then if pressed, I'd say something like, yes, buddy, I'll get right on that now, if you stop buzzing around like a blue-arse fly. We'd sound different is my point. We talk in different ways.
We're different, but we're the same.
Even the regional dialect that does the aboot thing doesn't actually say aboot. They say about kind of weird. They say it like about. I can't do it because I'm not from Northern Ontario or Manitoba or whatever the fuck. But even the small group of people who are supposed to have that accent don't actually talk like that. It's an oversimplification Americans made to make fun of them, which we in turn adopted as some sort of weird masochistic national pride thing. Because Canada's just America's pain pig. We were so desperate to have anything that identified us that we just rolled with the punches. Sure, man, we say aboot. We say that now. Why not? And I find that worth noting, right? Because Jimmy John's video is actually the second part of another video that he made calling out Canadian content creators for not talking about Canadian stuff as much as they do American stuff. And that's a fair point to make. Lots of people say that to me all the time. How come you don't talk about Canada stuff? But it is weird for him to pretend like he doesn't understand why. He is so clearly aiming his content at an American audience. Like, he is so careful to jam-pack his videos with little signifiers of Canadianness that Americans would recognize. He gets it, obviously. And I'm not saying that to criticize him, because there's nothing wrong with doing that. He recognizes the fundamental truth, as indeed all Canadian content creators do, that America's just a bigger audience to appeal to. American politics in particular are just more consequential to a general audience, because America, and I really can't stress this point hard enough, rules the world. So like the stuff they do, the people they elect, whatever minorities they demonize this month, it all affects everyone else. Nobody cares what Canada does. Canada's not in a position to do nothing to nobody. And we kind of like that about ourselves. Canadians love the idea that we're kind of hokey little irrelevant guys. It lets us pretend like we'd be better if we were the ones in charge. We're harmless little goofballs, you see. We call our money loonies because we're just a bunch of knuckleheads. Not like America, we're not like them. America had to fight in a revolutionary war to become a country. Canada just asked nicely. America had to have the Civil War to end slavery. Canada never allowed slavery in the first place. Big asterisk on that. Big asterisk. Americans are loud, crass, and rude. But Canadians are sweet, innocent little angel babies who apologize if they even make eye contact with you and they just want to eat maple syrup and watch the Leafs eat shit. Canadians have this persistent, utterly superstitious belief that when traveling abroad, Americans will put Canadian flags on their luggage so as to reap the benefits of the good reputation they assume Canadians must have internationally and avoid the repercussions of the bad reputation they assume Americans must have internationally. Now, I don't think many Americans do this. Americans, from my observation, are not a people known to be unpatriotic, but it has become so taken for granted in the minds of Canadians that I've heard many people express genuine anxiety that they won't be believed when they say they're Canadian in other countries. This is something we deeply want to be true, that everyone likes us and dislikes them, because we're different from them and everyone has to see that, right? We're the nice ones. Good golly gosh, we're just so embarrassed by the antics of our southern neighbors. We're cool. We use the metric system. You know that, right? You know we use the metric system, right? We're cool. You like us, right? And my fellow Canadians may not like to hear this. But in every meaningful way, we are the exact same as the United States. The core of our identities is the same, and the differences are superficial and mostly imagined. Now, don't get me wrong, we're certainly different countries with different laws, but culturally, we are the same thing. Again, to his credit, January Jones argues this point as well, albeit with perhaps less condemnation than I am about to. Both Canada and the United States are two parts of the same settler colonialist project, designed and maintained in the interest of white supremacy. We are both occupiers of the various indigenous nations whose lands we stole and then, in many cases, proceeded to then ruin. We are proportionately equal participants in the exportation of that violence throughout the rest of the world. We are the baddies. Canada, the country of Canada. Our federal lawyers, who represent Canada, the country, in court, argued that we, Canada, had no legal requirement to provide First Nations peoples with drinkable water. Now, I'm not a legal scholar. I don't know if that's true. Seems like it should not be true, but maybe it is. I don't know. We do shitty racist stuff all the time. I could believe that we made a shitty racist law on purpose to be shitty racists. Sure, I believe it. But and just hear me out on this, right? Just give them the fucking water. How much does that cost? Trick question, no matter how much it is, I don't give a fuck. Just do it so they can be alive. The whole reason this issue of legal responsibility had to be clarified is because just a staggering amount of First Nations reservations and communities, some of which we, Canada, literally forced them into, have been under water boil advisories because their water has been unsafe for, in some cases, decades. And I'm not sure I need to explain this to my audience of young urban sophisticates, but just in case there are any Canadian federal lawyers watching, you die if you don't have water. And most Canadians, I think, would broadly agree, in the abstract if not necessarily in practice, that it's preferable people not die. So just fucking fix the water, assholes. It need not be the case that we have a legal responsibility to do this, before we do it, right? Because it's certainly not illegal to do. Nothing in Canadian federal law dictates that we must have libraries or trash collection, because we all recognize those are good things which must be done. In this case, not treating the water is, and I'm actually putting this mildly here, mass murder. And I strongly feel that when the law not only allows for but actively encourages mass murder, the law should be changed. And failing that, it does not give you the moral license to allow that mass murder to happen. Again, my audience knows this. They're cool and smart, but just in case there are any Canadian federal lawyers watching, murder among polite society is frowned upon. Write that down. Especially because that water belongs to them in the first place. So really, we, and again, when I say we, I mean Canada, Canadian settlers, at the very least, shouldn't be the ones with the exclusive right to decide what is done with it. Because, imagine this, right? Imagine you had a guest in your house, and they asked for a glass of water, and you told them, sorry, I don't have a legal requirement to give you one. You wouldn't do that. That's an asshole move. Now imagine you're a guest in their house, and you stood in front of their sink and pissed in it, and then told them they weren't allowed to use it, even if they were dying of thirst, and you have no legal responsibility to get out of the way and let them use their own sink. Even that example is too charitable, because a guest in someone's home typically is invited. And lest you think I'm cherry-picking examples here, it should also be pointed out that as recently as 2019, Indigenous women have been unwittingly sterilized in Canadian hospitals. The Canadian government also routinely invades unceded Indigenous territory whenever they find something within it that they want, and they will defend in court their right to do so, even though, of course, they do not actually possess that right. And even if they did, why should anyone care? Why should Indigenous nations respect that right over their own rights? And I bring these things up for two reasons. Firstly, we should always be bringing them up. Holy shit, that's so fucked up. How is this still a problem? How hard could it possibly be to fix this water? Why on earth would you possibly feel the need to clarify that you have the legal right to not fix it instead of just fixing it? Those are rhetorical questions, by the way. The answer is obviously that it's a deliberate effort to exterminate Indigenous people. Don't bother running defense on this one, bootleggers. Nobody is fooled. Secondly, I think it demonstrates pretty conclusively that Canada's polite, nice guy facade facilitates the exact same white supremacist violence endemic to the United States. So too does our government's full-throated support for mass extermination in Gaza and the rest of occupied Palestine. Now, I think JJ is entirely correct when he refers to Canada and the United States as part of one shared American civilization. The United States happens to be the country with the lion's share of money and power in that shared civilization, but we're kidding ourselves if we pretend like Canada wouldn't act the exact same way if the situation were reversed. Because given the opportunity, historically, we always have and always do. Canadians like to pat ourselves on the back when we see American atrocities, while underplaying, ignoring, or actively denying our own. I mean, sure, we didn't do anything to help, but at least we're not the ones doing those particular crimes against humanity, those much more attention-grabbing crimes against humanity than our own. We get to feel like the good guys, because the scale of damage our neighbors are capable of vastly outstrips the damage we are capable of. We're just a little guy. Sorry about our big brother. He gets rowdy when he's had too much petroleum. Don't know where he keeps getting it. I talked a bit earlier about some of the ways that America extracts wealth from Canada, but I tricked you. That barely matters. That was mostly to set up the point that they do that so much more on a global stage. They do that on such a larger scale and so much worse to the global south, who actually suffer in poverty and famine as a result. Canada, comparatively, is a G7 nation. We're doing just fine. Once again, aside from our First Nations peoples. But that one's not America's fault, that we're doing that all on our own. That was our choice. Because as much as America extracts from Canada, we're more than compensated by a commiserate share of the wealth plundered from the rest of the world. Putting aside that, both countries are entirely premised on extraction from stolen land, we also reap the rewards of economic partnership with the largest, most sigma male global extractor. The richer they get from plundering everyone else, the richer we get in turn. You can think of Canada as like the Tristan Tate to America's Andrew Tate. We're also there doing the same kind of stuff, just less interestingly, and just kind of hanging on and getting wildly rich from it. Canadian resentment towards American imperialism or American cultural dominance is best understood as mostly sour grapes rather than the principled objection one should have to these things. Not so much a moral revulsion at the exploitation and oppression our countries engage in, but more so the belief that we, as the more polite, friendly oppressor, should be the ones holding the reins of global power. Because we'd say sorry when we overthrew democratically elected governments in order to retain unfettered access to their lithium, because we're nice. To put it simply, Canada hates in America that which we cannot face in ourselves, that we are part of the same nightmare regime of global terror even if we're not its leader. that we are active, enthusiastic participants in the same genocides and ecocide, that our nations are both founded on white supremacist violence which persists well into the present day. We're the same guys, doing the same stuff. The knee-jerk anti-Americanism of Canadians doesn't actually serve to critique American injustices, but rather to distract from our own injustices, and for that matter, complicity with American injustices. Because we're not like those other colonizers, we're cool. We use the metric system. We eat ketchup chips and Tim Hortons. The tragically hip. Don't you like the tragically hip? Remember the Montreal Expos? Remember Mr. Dress Up? You like us, right? You like us, right? We use the metric system.